So just as a bit of background then, for those of you that don't know me, my name's Barry Cranford. I'm one of the organisers of the London CTOs. So I'm not a CTO myself. I run a tech recruitment company called RecWorks. So we've been on a mission here for about the last 12 years to try and prove that recruitment can be a force for good in the tech industry beyond just getting people jobs. And that's really specifically around mentoring, learning, and career development. So put simply, if people want to learn and people are happy to share, then we're happy to make that connection. And that could be on a group basis, like today, with roundtables and standard events, or on a one-to-one level. So a lot of the one-to-one introductions that we make are within the Meet a Mentor platform, which is a community. We've got about 1,500 members now. We're over 2,500 introductions, always looking for more mentors. So if you're happy to get involved, mentor junior CTOs or students or anything, or you're looking for a CTO mentor yourself, then come and talk to me afterwards. See us on LinkedIn or yeah, just let us know. We actually have a small group within that for aspiring CTOs as well. So yeah, you're all welcome. It's all powered by recruitment though. So we don't make any money at all from any of the community initiatives that we do. So if anybody's looking for any developers, any tech teams at all, come and have a chat with us. Anyway, on to today. So today actually happened because I got in discussion with one of our senior recruiters, Dom French, who I know some of you will know. It was his idea to run the event, so I'll hand over to him and let him explain a little bit about what it's going to be about. Dom.
Great, thank you, Barry. Hello, everyone. As you know, this is a roundtable discussion on the challenges of scaling a business. So I wanted to host discussion on this topic because I mean, I've worked with CTOs for 8 years, and I've yet to come across a CTO that hasn't faced scaling pains, and so I felt this is a great discussion for a roundtable. I also wanted to learn more about this topic, so I can help some of my current clients who are kind of dealing with these problems at the moment, and then also better prepare potential clients in the future on what to expect. So we've collected some questions from the signups, also a few from my clients as well. So we'll read those out, but in general, please do ask questions, get involved, share stories. After all, it's your roundtable. When you do have a question, I think the best way of doing it is if you could just unmute your microphone and then I'll bring you in. So it's quite simple. You can also post questions to the chat and I'll do my best to squeeze those in. Now, to kick off the discussion, is there anyone, I guess, that's been through this maybe once or a couple of times that want to share what challenges they faced, even maybe the most common challenges or any challenges that they perhaps didn't sort of anticipate, just to help those that are kind of starting their sort of journey into working at a scale up?
I'll if no one else is going to speak up, I'll have a go. So the simplest rule, sorry, it's very dark here. The simplest rule that I've had for it is be aware of self-created bottlenecks. But I think that also comes with the caveat of it depends how fast you're scaling. So I've been in businesses where for us super fast meant say doubling every 12 months-ish. And I've been in other businesses where super fast meant doubling every 3 to 4 months. Obviously, there is a rather big difference between both of those, although both companies would have identified themselves as scaling up as fast as possible. So there's quite a wide variety there, but in both cases, it's still self-created bottlenecks were often the biggest problem. So you'd design a group or a team or a project or something, and you'd plan for how it would look over the next X months or the next half a year or year, forgetting that within that time frame, that one team or that one project would have to become 4 teams or 3 projects. And so you were creating these mistakes that then came back to bite you before the end of the year.
Thank you, Adam. Has anyone else here kind of encountered the same problems from their perspective?
I can share a couple of stories. I've been involved in 2 startups already, which has, not great success of scaling, I would say. It's B2B businesses. One of them, the bottlenecks are all around the place. I think we can classify them as like scaling teams, making sure like it's impossible to hire very fast, right? And you always like people close to the ground, understanding the direction of the business. It's always a big deal, right? So scaling a team is one thing. Another thing is scaling infrastructure. In my previous startup, infrastructure costs like around 30% of total cost. And I think in the current one, it's also pretty high. I think that's pretty typical, maybe pretty typical. That's 2 lines. But I think what's the biggest problem for those 2 businesses was not like scaling engineering, actually. It was scaling the business and the business model, where it depended somewhat on consultancy, is not as scalable. So yeah, all sorts of bottlenecks. Happy to hear other experiences.
Thank you, Andrew. Anyone else would like to challenge that or add anything else?
I'd add one other thing, which it's not just a function of a CTO role, but you talk to any business and it's in the top 2 or 3 problems, which is just communication. And that any channels of communication that you put in either within the engineering side or across the business are always going to lag what's needed. And it's only when the difference between what you need now and what you set up gets too great that you then change that. And it's slightly the same for any of these processes, is they tend to go in a stepwise fashion, whereas the business generally, well, I suppose the business will go in a stepwise as well, in that there are large, whether it's a contract, a new client or something, which suddenly means that you're scaling in a sort of stepwise fashion rather than just linearly. But particularly communication is one of those things that will always lag, and you have to be, I think, keen and particularly aware of. I mean, we work in a business which is fundamentally about communication, and yet as developers, notoriously bad at communicating at anything other than on a very technical level.
Just on the topic of communication, is there anything that you obviously highlighted it is an issue? I mean, what would you recommend is a process or a way of kind of remedying that, essentially?
I'd say over communicate as much as you can at all times, and it might be enough. I've never seen a scale up communicate too much, nowhere near too much. I've seen many that have communicated far too little. But if you assume you need to over communicate at every single instance, for every team, for every interaction, for every group, every up level, every down level, every skip level, everything you can think of, then you might just about communicate enough.
I don't have I have somewhere, should I say, quite a good graph on it that shows that the senior team are very often a sort of a cycle or a half a cycle ahead of a lot of the rest of the business. They've looked at the strategy, they've looked at what's going on, and by the time that's filtered down, they're on to the next thing. And so trying to recognize that and ensure that actually the senior team communicate what's going on and what they're thinking of, because if that's taking a couple of months, very often they're on to the next thing, and it's natural. We assume that everybody knows what we've been, you might be talking about that within the senior leadership team, and you tend to assume that everybody else knows what's going on. As Adam said, it's ensuring that you feel you're over communicating.
Guys, I have a question about over communication. Because I think the challenge in scaling any system of humans or machines is actually to reduce communication, because communication channels grow, was it exponentially or power of 3? I don't remember exactly the math. They grow way faster than the number of participants. And I'll say, if you build a startup, is everyone talking to everyone? The same for a system. You have a monolith. Every part of the code can talk to any other part of the code. When you scale an organization, the idea is to build teams, right? But why would you do teams? Is to reduce communication channels. Is beyond 2 pizza teams. Then the challenge is to define communication channels. And I don't know how well they do this in Amazon, but they say every communication should be through interfaces for humans and machines. And isn't there the way of scaling things? I mean, systems or humans is the same thing.
I think in most organizations, Chris, that's dealt with by the concept of communication up and down. So obviously where you've got horizontal communication, like in a startup where everybody probably talks to everybody else because there's no proper formed departments per se, but you've got like a head of everything there, the people are actually doing stuff. As an organization grows, you tend to facilitate more up-down communication, which is generally your defined interfaces. And those are generally through defined forums, things like governance, that sort of thing. So there might be a group that meets once a month to discuss a particular thing, for example.
Yeah, but like in any, like in a system, apparently we're not allowed to talk to his master slave, but you have the coordinator or hierarchy, and that's relatively unflexible and unscalable. But you have the idea of fully distributed systems where it's more like a choreography. It's an ecosystem, and Amazon claim to do that. I don't believe them, obviously, but they claim to have teams that talk to other teams through interfaces, and there is no hierarchy.
It does happen. I mean, you do have teams that naturally communicate with other teams to, essentially because they are cogs in the same machine, and that is generally through forums within larger organisations. As I say, it comes back to that concept of meeting every so often to try and help deliver what the company's strategy is. Now, what Amazon is like probably completely different to most businesses anyway, but in most organisations, it's generally a strategy is formed, and then it's trying to work out exactly how that strategy is going to be delivered. So if you're a big organisation, the idea is that you have these forums around that can take those instructions for those cogs in that machine, if that makes any sense. So it does scale, and communication doesn't grow exponentially as a startup moves to an enterprise, and as that enterprise gets bigger. But you do end up having a massive overhead in communication. Yeah. Just to try and keep it formalized.
Yeah. I mean, my point is, everyone say communication. But actually, slow down. There's only so much you can communicate. You have to do some work as well.
So I think
that's a meeting for everything,
It's partly my fault in how I phrased that, but there's really 2 very different types of thing covered by the communication word. And at the simplest level, without thinking about it too much, I'd say it's you've got pull-based communication and push-based communication. It's the push-based stuff, which is where you've all got to try and over-communicate as much as possible. You talk incessantly about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, when I'm doing it. You talk about what your team is doing, why your team is doing it, when you're doing it, who you're doing it with, where you're going to do it, everything you can. But on the pull-based side, that's where the Amazon interfaces stuff is hugely valuable. And I'm certainly a big fan of working that way, where if you need information on something, there are clearly defined interfaces for you to get it. And those interfaces are exactly as you said, sometimes human and sometimes digital, sometimes automated in some way. But if you don't use interfaces for that, it becomes, again, because the organization keeps changing as it's growing, the non-interface you were using, like Joe Bloggs sitting over there, but I was just using him because he knew some stuff. He changes his job title or his role or the team he's in. And now you're asking him for information about stuff that he sort of still remembers, but doesn't really know anymore. And he starts giving you wrong information. And that's where what you really wanted was an interface. Like you wanted the head of a lead mobile iOS person, not Joe. You wanted Joe because he's currently the lead mobile iOS person. So that when the person changes out, the title is still the same. Or you wanted the wiki for what the mobile engineering teams are going to do, which again, it's a form of interface. You go to that, the content might change completely, but you know that you can always reliably go to it to pull the latest information.
Yeah.
I have a bit of a question then that kind of builds on this is one of the things that you're talking about here are interfaces that are not necessarily people answering a question. And I think this is something that we think about quite a bit in our company is, you know, how much of what we're doing should we be documenting and how much of it should we just be doing in the moment? And so I was wondering if anybody has any, you know, strong perspectives on how you handle things like, you know, concentrated effort to disseminate information in a structured format versus just responding kind of like in a more transactional way.
There is a framework for it, and I'm always loath to sort of go down this route because it's very easy to get bogged down in it. But the RACI framework of thinking about it stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Is thinking about for any of those sorts of decisions, who's responsible for making the decision, who's accountable for it, who you should consult, and who you should inform basically after the fact. And by getting that right, it allows you to remain fairly agile. You know, okay, yes, I can make that decision. I need to consult so and so. And actually, when we've done that, these are the people that need to know about it. So trying to, I mean, Chris, I think, yeah, it's not about that exponential growth, but it's about managing it to make sure that you're communicating as efficiently as possible and that people know what's going on. Those people that need to know, and if there's anybody that you need to consult, then yeah, you do that. So it's worth having a look at. I mean, it's like any of these frameworks, it goes into, I think, way too much detail for a startup or a rapidly growing business, but it's quite useful, certainly with the sort of the hierarchy side of knowing, okay, yeah, who's accountable for doing that, who's responsible for doing it, and you get you can answer your own questions as to, yeah, actually who I should be speaking to about it.
I had a follow-up question, if I may. Richard, you're talking a bit about communication moving from sort of horizontal to vertical, and Adam, you spoke about changing from sort of talking to the individual to talking to the position or sort of through an interface. And I'd be interested in sort of the headcount around that. So at what point in your guys' experience does the headcount sort of necessitate a change of communication style?
I mean, obviously, Adam, please chime in if you wish. So in terms of the overhead and the structure, it tends to grow based on obviously organisation size, which was obviously a very dumb way of actually putting it, and I apologise. But if you're in a startup mentality at the moment, I don't know how big your company is at the moment, Neil, but you generally start with a startup where your chiefs of are effectively the people who are also doing as well. And then your chiefs of are going to start taking on staff. So you might take on, as a CTO, some developers to help with your development load. But then you're going to start probably building out your system. So as I say again, Neil, I'm not quite sure what your company's doing, but scaling isn't just for size because of the amount of people you're now serving in terms of customers or anything, but also in terms of change, as in you might be starting to do different offerings. So you as a CTO might start being in a position where you're now accountable for several different types of product set. or several different types of technology, depending on how you've actually formalized your team. Now, in terms of how you scale your own team, it would probably be based on, you'll start forming some logical containers based on the amount of load. So you'll probably start feeling a bit overwhelmed with the amount of communication and thinking that you actually have to do. And then you start nominating, let's say, I want a head of infrastructure, I want a head of developing that particular system, I want a head of developing that particular system. And the rest of the business goes through the same sort of change. So if they're say for a financial business, you'd start building quite a large second line of defense to face off against the frontline operations. So if you were a CRO, you'd actually start having your MLRO, your other risk parties. You'd start having maybe a compliance person to face off for IT, that sort of thing. And the same with finance, you'll probably start off with a CFO, but then the CFO is going to start realizing quite quickly that they can't manage all the streams, so they start building out those teams. And that's how I've seen it. As I often say to startups, if you try to start in the way where you scale easily, you'll never start. So you need to start somewhere. So you accept that actually from a startup to moving towards enterprise, you are going to have growth pain, but generally the growth is organic. Now that can be problematic if, let's say, either the growth projections are off or that the rate of growth is extremely fast. So if you're trying to scale for lots of different types of different systems or anything under yourself, Neil, you might want to start building a structure in advance of the load. But then again, that comes back to the whole projection v reality growth thing. So, and that's one of the biggest problems I see, other than cost realization, is that if the projections are off and all of a sudden you're having to scale quite quickly, far in advance of what was originally predicted, or the other way around, where you've created a structure that could accommodate growth, which never came. So you're now having to downscale that. That can be problematic. But yeah, in my experience, you generally grow as you need to, and you do that based on projections.
Yep. Cool. Thanks.
I'd say I don't really know is the short answer. I've not done it successfully enough to have tried many different ways, many different times. There's been a couple of overarching themes. One is, I think, the tail end of what you were just saying there, that unpredictability and everything violating every expectation you have seems to be the norm. So I've tended to, over time, try and fall back on approaches that are very, very flexible and reactive, and tried to, well, not even try to, I just have become less and less prescriptive over time, because the prescription, sooner or later, something totally unexpected happens, and it's pretty much guaranteed when you're scaling fast. And if you've planned too well, you end up just wasting the planning time and you've started going in the wrong direction. Beyond that, there's a couple of things that have tended to work, but again, I haven't done it enough times to confidently say that these are right. So one of them, on the personal level, is to look at, as soon as you're doing enough of something that it's taking a lot of your time, go down the path of just constantly trying to make yourself obsolete within the company by creating someone else or a team to do the work you were doing, or to do when you're scaling up more often, to take the responsibility you were taking. So you try and just make sure you have no responsibility at all, and that your job is just to turn up and drink coffee. And that works quite well for a lot of stuff. It certainly works well on the what should I be getting rid of, and which responsibilities should I be shedding. And I've seen it help individuals like leads and senior engineers when they're asking, how do I scale up my group, my team, my proto team? At the more org-wide level, my favorite approach at the moment is to borrow Scrum's obsessive idea of no person can really handle groups of more than about 7 other people, and say that at any point you're looking to only have about 7 things. So and as soon as it gets more than that, you need to split it, and couple that with and when I say the Scrum approach, I mean not just the number 7, but Scrum says 7 plus or minus 2. So or 3, whatever numbers it ends up being. And so when you split it, you're also looking to create not go from, say, 7 individual development teams to managed by one person or one lead, to 7 teams managed by one person and 1 team managed by a second person. You want to split it into a team of 4 and a team of 4 teams and 3 teams. So you're always trying to keep that the amount of something that any person or team or department's dealing with to be within that close to 7-ish range, because then it inherently, from the moment you create a split, it already starts off that someone or some people are dealing with a multiple of other communication points. I know this is sounding very vague, but again, this is what I've ended up leaning towards, is try and keep it as vague as possible, and then trust your people to react and figure out how to actually implement that on the ground, because everything keeps changing underneath you. But again, I only had a few experiences of this, so I'm certainly not an expert on it.
Cool, thanks for that.
So I was going to just add to Adam's as well. This is going to sound really bad what I'm about to say, but I think if you're scaling teams and people, generally you probably find you'll get more out of stressed out teams than you will out of lazy teams. So if you've got too many people, you start finding people getting a bit lazy. And I've seen this. I did a development effort quite a few years ago. I had 180 developers. You can imagine how bad that was. We had more output by reducing the number down to 40. So obviously having a large amount of people does create its own overhead, but also those people seem to be less motivated. The other thing I just wanted to mention as well, which I forgot, Neil, is this notion of forums. So as I just bear with me, a lot of the stuff I've been doing the last few years has mainly been in the finance industry, and the finance industry is heavily regulated. There are things you have to do, but you'll find that if you're doing various things, or you're doing various product development or whatever else, that affects various other elements in the business, and probably comes back to Chris's point again around the RACI, and that you may want to start forming forums which you hold every so often with people from that RACI, if you're doing various product development, or you're doing it as part of a scaling action, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Sorry, you were saying RACI? What? Sorry, I missed that word.
Sorry, so Chris actually spelled it out, RACI. It's usually pronounced one of 2 ways. It's RACI or RACI, depending. But it's effectively that responsible, accountable, consultative, and informed. Sometimes there's various variations on those letters. It gives you an idea of who needs to be involved in the decisions around a particular product set, or however you've divided your deliverables. So obviously, mainly being CTOs on this one, you probably divide it down the software services that you're actually delivering. So once you form that RACI, it might be, for example, you do something, but you need to inform your infrastructure team or whoever manages your infrastructure. But conversely, if infrastructure do something, they'll need to consult you. So, and especially if you're doing more micro development, so if you're doing micro integration, the fact that you're going to have connection contracts with the other components that you're actually interfacing with, you also probably want to make sure that that RACI is in a good place. So it's a project management term. I hate project management, but it's a project management term. I see Chris is laughing because he's had the same. But it is actually quite a useful tool, to be fair. And Chris was very right to obviously give that to the forum.
I just have a comment regarding what Adam was saying about splitting the teams. So what I've seen over the years is that there is no one rule for any company. Each company is different depending upon the individuals and also the product functions. But what you said about like having something 7 plus or minus 2, that's mostly correct. Because what I've seen is that it's around 6 people. Like what I do is that if the Scrum meetings in the morning takes too long, that means it's time to split the team. It's just like a generic rule. It's just because of the fact that then the communication overhead outweighs all the pluses, and then by that division, it just comes to a point where you can manage it more easily. But having said that, the information exchange and transparency across the organization is very paramount. A lot of times when you're scaling, I mean, technology scaling is very easy, I would say, because there is horizontal scaling and things like that, where you can actually handle a lot of data. But when you're scaling the organization, it's a lot to do with the individuals and also to deal with the culture of the company. So if you don't have that in place, then all the communication channels, all the communications which you put in there, it might not work. So that's why I was saying that a lot of this depends upon quite a bit on the company culture and the individuals there. Just 2 cents.
No, I think that's a great thing to add, to be honest. And you're right in terms of if you're running a scrum meeting, that's how you're communicating with people. You're going to try and keep that to half an hour. It's by definition, it's a stand-up. If you find it's starting to overrun, then actually it's probably time to start splitting it out. So where, let's say you originally had a scrum with your team and it started to go over to an hour, you might think, well, you know what, I'm going to start splitting that team into 2 with these responsibilities. And what I'll do is I'll have a scrum with the teams responsible, all the responsibles for those teams, to try and do like the high level and lower level objectives. So that might be how you'd start splitting it.
Agree.
Okay, guys, should we move on to maybe a different type of challenge? I mean, if you guys want to continue with, I guess, the topic of communication, we can always set up a breakout room later on. But does anyone else have a particular challenge or pain that they'd like to get some advice on?
So I have a question to multiple people. So what I see with a lot of these scaling challenges is recruitment. I mean, as you all know how that pain is. So in terms of recruitment, what I've seen is that as a CTO, I mean, we will be taking multiple roles. It's not just about a technology. You might be looking into operations, finance, or also even looking into products at times. So when the recruitment happens, I see that there's a lot of time we spent on the recruitment because we want to get the best people, because the people would be making the team success or a failure. So what do you think, like how much time we spend, like as a CTO, how much we usually spend on this recruitment? I know that I end up doing quite a lot of those ones in my previous roles because we scaled companies in multiple dimensions. So just want to see, want to hear about you guys, like how often do you, define how much time you spend on recruitment from your day-to-day activities, and how much do you give it to other people in the team?
Well, this is my pet topic at the moment. Last company I left in July last year, and I've spent most of the last 12 months researching a book on how we should be doing tech recruitment. But my short answer is you should be spending all your time doing the recruitment in a scale up. This is independent of the book. I mean, this is partly why I've ended up writing the book, is because I'm not a recruiter. I've never been a recruiter. And I generally didn't really like recruitment that much for most of my career. And I realized once I was spending time in scale-ups, actually it became borderline the most important thing I could possibly be doing as a CTO. Assuming you do all the basics properly and you're good and skilled at the core things of being a CTO, the thing that then became the big multiplier on the success of what you were trying to do and of everyone around you was your ability at recruiting and how well you were doing it. Some of the interesting stats I've dug up whilst researching this book are they keep doing surveys of Fortune 500 companies in the US and FTSE 100 companies in the UK, and surveys of CEOs and of chairmen and surveys of VC firms asking what is the most important thing your C-levels could be doing with their time? What's the most important thing a CEO can be doing with their time? And it comes up about 40 to 60% of them say recruiting across the board for all those companies. And then asked, and what percentage of or how much of the time do you spend doing recruiting? Where is it on your list of activities? The normal answer is somewhere around item number 8 or 10 or something like that. So there's this enormous gap between what people say they should be doing and what they're actually doing. And I think certainly when you're scaling up, spending as much time as you can as a CTO recruiting is probably never a bad idea, because at the end of the day, our business is driven by people. We're not, I mean, there might be a few people here from hardware companies, but on the whole, generally people here I expect are in some kind of software, and software is not made by machines, it's made by people. So the thing that is driving your growth, the thing that's driving your revenue, your profit, everything is the people you've got. And if you're growing, that means you need to grow the people, otherwise you're going to stagnate, and everything else is arguably secondary to that. Also, if you're hiring good people, they're really good at sorting things out themselves. And to a large extent, I'm not saying you shouldn't do management, but to a large extent, you can get away with going soft or going dark on a lot of the management, a lot of the leadership, if you've hired some really good people up and down the company.
I'll add a little bit to that as well. Thanks, Adam. So hi, everyone. I'm Kaustav from Cohesis. So I think there's a phrase or saying that I came across a couple of years ago that really resonates with me. There are those who work in the business, and then there are those who work on the business. And there's a key distinction there. As a CTO of a very small scale up or a startup company, you may be working in the business because you're the senior most technical person. You've got the chops to write the software, and you're in the business. You're writing the software. However, you can flip the coin on its head and think about it from working on the business, right? So somebody who's working on the business is not in the nitty-gritty day-to-day executional operational side of things. They've taken a step back and they've started to look at the business as a whole holistically. So for example, as a CTO, you might be thinking about how do you attract the best talent to your company, and a way to do that may well be to have really strong thought leadership. You may need to be on the circuit, on stage, blogging. You may need to be doing many other forms of communication, outbound communication, talking about the great work that your company does and why it's a leader in its sector or whatever it might be that you're trying to promote. And I think that is one of the key things that I see quite often, not just CTOs, but C-level leaders in young startup companies missing quite often. So I think the take home from my messages is think about whether you're working in the business or whether you need to take a step back and work on the business and think about its expansion, its growth, its talent acquisition, and so on.
That's really fascinating. Thanks for that input. What things would you prioritize within all those different outreach that you were talking about, stuff?
Yeah, so I can just talk about examples from my career. So, I a couple of years ago I worked at a global agency, and we were trying to expand a regional nearshore development center in Eastern Europe. And in that region, nobody had heard of our company, right? So, and it also was a challenge because in that particular country, we were trying to set up, and if a developer had never heard of the brand, the culture was such that it wasn't prestigious enough to go and work for an unknown company. So the things that we did were, we went out there, we attended the biggest conferences in the region, and we set up stall. We tried to sponsor and get a keynote, and so we could talk about ourselves, the work that we do, and something that's meaningful and impactful for the audience and through the work that we were doing in the industry. So that's one example. I think the other thing that's much easier and less expensive to do is just get your stories out there. Get it up on Medium, get it up on LinkedIn. Set yourself a goal to have a regular cadence of putting out thought leadership, whether that's once a week or once a month. Think of the point you're trying to make, and make sure the message is really clear. You set the scene, you carry that common thread throughout your narrative, and then you conclude with a takeaway, a key takeaway, and that should generally be the format you should follow, or I followed. Certainly that's resonated the most. If you're putting out stuff on LinkedIn, on Medium,
This is something I discovered much later on in my career, but believe it or not, hashtags, oh my God, make such a huge difference. If you can tag your articles with the correct hashtags, it can be the difference between a couple of 100 people and a couple of thousands or tens of thousands of people reading that article. And then don't be shy about asking your employees, your fellow colleagues to re-amplify, to put it out there on their social channels and just get the message out there. I think that's a low-hanging fruit. Getting your blogging, maybe getting onto podcasts, being a guest on a panel. So if there's a conference going on, get on the panel and have an opinion, get your voice out there so people get to hear you and your branding.
Do you find that Twitter is something that you engage with at all, or is that like a different beast to
yeah.
on the side?
Yeah, I mean, Twitter definitely, but there's a limited scope there. Obviously, you could have a complete thread going, and there are many people who are famous for doing that. If you're in the fintech space and you follow, you'll know that he's one for posting 30, 40 chunk Twitter threads, and that's certainly a way of doing it. But it would be a complementary channel, not one of my main channels. I would just cross post my Medium blog or my LinkedIn blog or my piece in such and such magazine or online website across onto Twitter just to get the volume and the mass.
Kaustav, just to pick up on something you said there about get your stories straight and finish with a call to action and that kind of thing. Could you give any specifics around the kind of stories that you would say you could write that you would then be able to use for recruitment purposes at all?
Yeah, depending on your audience, various tactics work really well. I always find it really powerful to start off a presentation or a talk or even a written piece by telling a story. So rather than diving directly into the topic itself, think about a personal experience from your past that's relevant to the message that you're trying to put across, and tell a short story in the beginning that sets the scene. And that's your opener to then start talking in detail about the topic that you want to talk about. And I think, when you do that, it helps people connect with you on a personal level, on an emotional level, because quite often people can write, people can be up on stage, but unless you create that connection early on in your presentation, people will switch off. People will just be on here checking their work emails or tweeting about not your topic, but something else. So set the scene, get people emotionally engaged, then go into what you need to talk about. And then I think the key thing at the end is not to abruptly end your written piece or your presentation. Is to really wrap up, is to loop back to setting the scene at the beginning and then wrap up with the key takeaway, either one key takeaway or 2 or 3 key takeaways. And that's what helped, that loop back, that process, that system helps people remember what you said, and it kind of embeds some of that knowledge, those takeaways in people's minds, and that's what they'll remember you for days, weeks, or months later.
Thanks for that, Kaustav. I got a funny story regarding that. So we did so this is slightly off topic. So we did an experiment on LinkedIn regarding like these medium stories and re-amplifying through employees and things like that. And funny enough, what we found out was that, let's say these re-amplified stories got like several thousand views. But if the more views we got was from people actually posting freebies, which they got from the company, that had more views. So this is, social media is very interesting. So these kind of things, sometimes you think just having a very well thought out article where you spend like 40 hours actually creating that. But sometimes it's not that not that one which actually gives more views. It's actually just some random stuff or maybe even freebies. And it's just a funny, but.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think one thing that I used to do years ago in my career was spend hours, days, sometimes a week or two writing a piece, and then I'd put it out there. Then I'd get really disheartened when I only got a 300 or 400 views. And what I've learned over time is if you're really passionate about a topic or something pops into your mind, don't always aim for an A-star grade written piece. Just get the thoughts out of your mind. Make sure you proofread it so it doesn't have stupid typos and errors all over it. And just get the thoughts out there. That stream of content and that engagement that you need to create is the most important thing, rather than just spending a week trying to perfect the piece that you're putting out there. And if you're lucky enough to have access to copywriters or people who have the talent for setting the tone of your piece that you've written, or the speech that you've prepared, share it with them, ask for feedback, and you'll find sometimes you get magical suggestions that you can action really, really quickly, and it'll help you hone and refine your art of communication.
I think also, probably just to carry on that vein, if you don't spend 40 hours covering every single element of whatever you're trying to communicate, and you leave some of it open to interpretation, just the discussion that comes on the back of it can help promote your material. So sometimes you want to get that absolutely perfect, you spend 40 hours, but actually you're better off spending 40 minutes and you'll get a better spread.
Yeah, and I mean, this is not always possible, but I've been forcing myself to do this over the last couple of years. If that burning topic's just come into your mind, force yourself to write that piece, if it's a written piece, in one sitting. Just get it out, get it down, get it into words. And you might not have to hit publish at the end of that 40 minutes or 1 hour, but you've got the entirety of the thought piece down, and then you can go back to it, you can correct it, you can refine it, and hopefully before the day is up, you hit the publish button and it's out there.
Tying that back into the recruitment side, that the whole, I think that marketing piece and the whole communication is, you can tie it in because it's about making your business somewhere that people actually want to come and work. And nowadays, it's a lot harder in the social media environment that exists at the moment, because there's so much other noise, there's so many other businesses competing for people. But if anything you can do like that to get the word out, either from your own employees or from the pieces that you're publishing, because people will read them, people who are either because they've found out about you from a recruiter, or they're looking for other jobs, they will go to these sorts of pieces and read up on you and see whether that is a place that they want to come and work. And it will help you get the better people. I had this, it was probably a lot easier, but back in the late 90s, and we were up in Scotland, we built a consultancy business that people knew. It had a great reputation, and we had a lot of people actually applying because they wanted to come and work there, not because we were looking for people. We got applications coming in because people wanted to come and work there. And so by writing those pieces, by any of that sort of marketing, that you can help build the brand as a tech place, as a great place to come, as somewhere people want to come, will help you.
And I think internal marketing is so important as well. So I think the point that Yadu, you've just made on the chat, I think is really interesting. It's something that I do, and I've seen many other leaders in the C-suite do, some very well. So, if you're journaling your day-to-day activities, it's a great log to have, so that on the Monday, maybe you write this on a Sunday, but you put your internal thought leadership out to your entire company. And journaling is a really good way of doing that. I think internal marketing is really important, because ultimately the people who work for you will one day, not all of them, but a few of them, might write a review about your company or about the people in your company. Go to Glassdoor or many other places. When people are looking for jobs or the next move, they do their research, and hearing positive things from existing employees because of the leadership style in the company is a really powerful thing to leverage.
Hi guys, I think we're coming up to about 15 minutes now. So if anyone wants to move into the breakout rooms, it might be a better time to do that at this point.
Yeah, okay, 10 minutes to go. So I think most of you, have been on at least one of our calls before, so you've probably seen how how the breakout rooms work. But for those that haven't, basically we'll press a button and then you just have an opportunity to join. You'll be in with maybe 3 or 4 others. So if you want to be with anyone in particular, you can send me a direct message and I'll let you know. I'll pop you in the room. But other than that, thank you everyone for joining. Thanks for getting involved. Thanks Dom for hosting. Yeah, some really interesting discussions there. So I'm gonna hit this breakout room button now. Like I say, so we should have 5 or 6 participants per room. So if you want to hang around, please do. If not, then hopefully we'll see you shortly. Cheers, guys.